All our stories are created for entertainment purposes only.
I've been reading a bunch of stories online lately, and I've really been getting into those tales about cheating spouses. I'm also kind of into the whole getting even and revenge aspect in these stories. I mean, I do enjoy romance stories, but not when the husband is getting used by the wife. It's funny because I realized that my wife has been using me for the past 7 years, which is how long we've been married. Back then, I used to think I was doing everything for Susan because I loved her so much. But now, I see that I was just doing what she wanted to avoid any conflicts. It's crazy how much I've learned about myself by reading these stories about cheating wives. I can't believe how clueless those husbands in the stories were. Were they living in the dark ages or something? Looking back, I realized that Susan pretty much used me throughout our whole marriage. We actually met in college. I was a senior and she was a sophomore. She was quite a looker. It took a few beers for me to gather the courage to approach her at one of the parties. When I asked her to dance, she said yes, and we started talking. I even pulled out that classic line, "What's a girl like you doing at a place like this?" She laughed. We both had a bit too much to drink, and she told me she had just broken up with her ex-boyfriend a couple of days before and decided to go out and have some fun. Her friend had told her about the party, so that's why she was there. We ended up getting pretty drunk and ended up making love in my dorm room. I even used a ball cap on the doorknob so my roommate wouldn't disturb us. It was actually the first time I ever used the cap. My roommate was usually the one who got the girls. I don't remember a whole lot about the night, but judging by the state of the bed in the morning, we must have had a blast. I even made her breakfast before taking her back to her dorm. I asked if I could see her again, and she told me she wasn't ready to start dating again, but if she saw me at the party, she wouldn't walk away. When I look back on it now, I think that was her way of saying she didn't think I was good enough for her. Every now and then, I'd spot her at other parties, but she'd usually stick with her girlfriends and dance with other guys. And who could blame her? She was good-looking and available. She did dance with me when I asked, but I wasn't sure if she genuinely cared for me or was just being polite. Fast forward a bit, and let me tell you, I came from a good family with strong values. The issue was, I didn't exactly stick to those values in college. I went to parties and got pretty drunk on more than a few occasions. Besides Susan, I did end up with a few other girls during my college years. These girls would have hooked up with just about anyone for the price of admission, if you catch my drift. It was like a way to get some action without going to a professional. I was feeling pretty miserable and my roommate could tell. Now, my roommate was Tony DeMarco, a good-looking Italian guy from New York who came to our college for its top-notch computer science program. We became really close friends. Tony was less shy than I was, and we helped each other out with our studies. I can honestly say we became as tight as brothers. It was Tony who made sure I got invited to the parties where I had my other escapades. He had the connections, you know? That's what I call a true friend. Our bond reached a whole new level one day when we were leaving class and Tony slipped on the steps. I quickly got behind him, pulled his head back, and reached into his mouth. I hooked my fingers behind his inverted tongue and pulled it back to where it belonged. As his airway cleared, he took in a big breath, and I realized I was close to tears at the thought of my best friend getting hurt. Tony's eyes opened, and he saw me holding his head. My face filled with emotion. "Mark, what happened?" he asked. I reassured him, saying, "Don't worry, Tony, you'll be okay, just a slip of the tongue." We both had a bit of a laugh, and he told me to let him up, assuring me he was fine. After the medics checked Tony out and gave him a clean bill of health, we headed back to the building entrance. However, Tony suddenly stopped in his tracks as he spotted a stretched limo parked in front with the driver standing next to the rear door. Tony approached the limo, and the driver opened the back door. Out stepped his father, Angelo DeMarco, an impressive figure at 6 feet and 220 pounds, with a smile to match. He hugged Tony tightly, relieved that his son was okay. "Dad, this is Mark," Tony introduced me. Angelo DeMarco smiled warmly and replied, "I know who he is." He turned to me and expressed his gratitude, saying, "Mark, I owe you for saving my son. I am in your debt. Anytime you need help, you contact me, okay? Do not forget, I mean it, anytime," he emphasized, shaking my hand with a firm grip. 5 minutes later, Tony had left for New York, leaving me to wonder if I had ever truly had a friend. But then, during my senior year, I met Susan. After our initial encounter, I would occasionally see her on campus, and she was always friendly. I began to think that she might have feelings for me. So I mustered up the courage to ask her out again, and she agreed. We went out to dinner and a movie, and our connection deepened. Over the next few weeks, we became intimate multiple times, and during one of those moments, I didn't use protection. When I asked Susan if she wanted to go out again the following week, she said yes, solidifying the fact that I had a girlfriend now. We continued seeing each other, and then Susan dropped a bombshell. "Mark, I'm pregnant. You're the only man I've been with. What are we going to do?" I was taken aback, but I was also brought up to do what I believed was right, even though I had a nagging suspicion that Susan might have used me. I was about to graduate in a month, with a job lined up at my dad's insurance office. I had taken business courses to become a licensed insurance agent. Susan, on the other hand, had been raised by her grandparents since her parents died in a car accident when she was 12. They had promised to support her education, and she aspired to become a legal secretary. Although I supported a woman's right to choose, I was personally against abortion. I felt it was different when it was someone else's choice. So, I suggested, let's get married. I have a good position waiting for me next month, and you can continue your education. You can take one semester off when the baby is born. We can do this. I love you and want our child. To be honest, I wasn't entirely sure if I loved her, but I wanted to do what was right. The alternative would have been to pay for termination, which I was reluctant to do. I had doubts about whether she loved me, but we ultimately agreed to get married. I wrote to my parents, letting them know that I would be getting married after graduation. I mentioned Susan's pregnancy and assured them that we loved each other and were planning to marry soon. I also gave them some insight into my dad's business, which included insurance, real estate, and an auction business. While we weren't wealthy, we were certainly well off. A month after my graduation, Susan and I tied the knot. We even invited Susan's grandparents to the wedding, as they seemed like lovely people who were genuinely happy for us. They thanked me for doing the right thing by Susan and took a moment to speak with me privately, expressing their understanding of Susan's sometimes headstrong nature. You probably know that she gets upset when things don't go her way. Honestly, I didn't know much about her at first. We met, got drunk, hooked up, and then, about 2 months later, we began dating. Suddenly, she drops the bombshell that she's pregnant. I started to think she found out about the pregnancy and got scared, so she started dating me, thinking I could be her solution. The thing is, she's a stunning woman with a pleasant personality, and I later discovered she's quite the actress. My parents liked her, and she was always helpful around them. We started off by renting a nice 3-bedroom house with an option to buy it within a year. At the beginning, I thought we were a good match. After our baby was born, Susan took a brief 10-week break from college, then transferred to a nearby school. She could easily commute, and my mom looked after our daughter Trina while Susan attended classes. I enjoyed my job, working in insurance and real estate, and occasionally helping out at auctions. I wasn't cut out to be an auctioneer, though. My dad and his employee Bob handled that. I didn't have much experience observing how married couples acted, as I'd only lived with my parents. However, I did notice that my parents seemed closer than Susan and I did. For the first couple of years, it was me working while Susan went to school. In the evenings, we'd stay home with Trina. We'd watch TV while Trina played on the floor. We had closeness maybe twice a week, and it was good. I always made sure Susan was satisfied, and I don't recall her complaining. After Susan graduated, I asked if she wanted to work in our company, but she expressed a desire to do billing or work as a secretary in a law office. She did land a job at a large law firm, starting as a receptionist. I thought the extra income would be nice, but Susan began splurging on herself. Don't get me wrong, I had a decent income and covered all our essential expenses. But once Susan started getting her paycheck, suddenly nothing we had was good enough. She insisted on getting a new car, and naturally, it had to be a sports car. Then she turned her sights on our furniture and appliances. I told her I wasn't going to replace everything. If she wanted all new stuff, she could pay for it herself. She was stubborn and determined to have her way, just like her grandparents had said. I eventually suggested splitting the cost of new furniture and appliances. But honestly, I never saw a penny of the rest of her money. I wasn't even sure about her salary. When tax season rolled around, she claimed her bosses advised us to file separately since they were lawyers. I found out later that they never told her that. She just didn't want me to know how much she was making. She did buy all her own clothes, and she had a closet full of them. Some of her outfits seemed a bit too revealing for the office, but whenever I brought it up, it led to an argument every single time. About 6 months after she started working, she told me she needed a night out with her girlfriends, her me time. So every Friday night, she'd head out with her friends. She'd usually be back by midnight, and honestly, I didn't have a problem with it. I played golf twice a week, so I couldn't complain. Once golf season ended, I joined a bowling team with the other agents from our office. Dance Business was our sponsor. This routine pretty much continued until Trina started school. Susan would lay out her clothes the night before, and I always got up with Trina. We'd have breakfast together, and I'd drop her off at school. I'd usually be the one to pick her up, unless I had an appointment. In that case, my mom would take her to her house until either Susan or I could pick her up. As time passed, Susan and I seemed to grow apart. It was a gradual process, but I could see it happening. She never really liked my friends and would act polite when we saw them, but behind their backs, she'd call them geeks, nerds, and a few other not-so-nice words. She had her own set of friends, the ones she'd invite over to hang out and play cards and such. I always played the role of the good husband, trying to avoid arguments. Honestly, I didn't care much for her friends either. It felt like I was back in college. Their conversations often revolved around closeness, and their parties were basically drinking binges at their homes. It usually led to an argument if I didn't want to go. Sometimes, it seemed like the guys would get a little too touchy with Susan. When I mentioned it to her, she just laughed it off. The truth is, I was often the target of their jokes. During this time, Susan started working later and later, and Trina and I became really close. She'd confide in me, sharing everything that happened at school. I was there every evening to help her with homework, and she loved to study. I attended parent-teacher conferences and supported Trina in everything she did. Susan continued to treat Trina well when she was home. She'd always use endearing terms with her like, honey this and honey that, even though all Trina really wanted was for her mother to be around more often. Whenever Trina mentioned something at school that she wanted her mom to attend, Susan would explain that she had to work to help provide for the family. We'd been married for nearly 7 years, and I often found myself going online after putting Trina to bed. I started reading these stories about cheating wives one after another, and it became apparent that Susan had been doing similar things for years. Was I just being paranoid, or was Susan really cheating on me? I had no doubt that I had been living with a cheating wife, even though she was quite the actress. I began keeping an eye out for telltale signs, like her phone conversations. She would often stop talking or change the subject when I entered the room. She made sure to delete any messages and regularly cleared the caller ID. I also noticed that after she went out with her friends, she'd always wash her clothes the next day, especially her underwear. There were plenty of other signs I read about on those story pages. She never seemed interested in being intimate after returning from a party. If I was away for a meeting or on a business trip, I'd sometimes stay at my parents' house. I briefly considered hiring a private investigator to follow her, but I figured, what was the point? We lived in a state where divorces typically resulted in a 50-50 split of assets. I also thought about getting surveillance equipment, like they did in the stories, but I knew she was fooling around, and I couldn't afford it anyway. My main concern was Trina. She was the reason I stayed with Susan. I worried that if we divorced, I might not get to see Trina as often as I wanted. She meant the world to me. Susan began spending more time with her friends, using any excuse to do so. Occasionally I'd join her, but I never enjoyed myself. She seemed to flaunt herself around other men, almost daring me to react. It had gotten to the point where nothing I did was good enough, and nothing we owned was as nice as what her friends had. We still had closeness, but it became a rare occurrence, maybe once a month if I was lucky. It felt like she was doing it out of pity for me. I stayed with her for Trina's sake, but I knew deep down that it was the wrong reason. Then, one day, something happened that turned everything upside down. I returned from a trip a day earlier than expected. This time, I didn't call home beforehand. It was evening when I arrived, and I noticed a strange car in our driveway. Without making a sound, I walked up to the front door and quietly unlocked it. The living room light was on, but there was no one there. I could hear noises coming from our bedroom. Well, darn it, you've got to be kidding me. It was Susan in our bed, and she wasn't alone. I wasn't surprised to see Brad with her. Brad ran the gym that Susan frequented, and he had a history of flirting with her. This time, though, they got caught in the act. One thing worth noting is that Brad's wife, Jill, is a model. She specializes in face and hand modeling, and she's undeniably attractive. Why would a guy cheat with a 7 when he has a 10 waiting for him at home? I've known Jill for a while, and she's one of the few people that Susan knows I like. So there I was, walking in on them. "What are you doing home?" Susan exclaimed. "You're supposed to call first. Now that you know, get out of the room so we can get dressed." "Yeah, maybe I'll give Jill a call and invite her over," I replied. "You tell Jill and I'll kick your A," Brad threatened. I stood there in the room, and Brad was right. He could probably kick my A, but at that moment I didn't see the point in starting a fight. What good would it do? I'd just end up getting beaten up, and Susan would get a kick out of it. So I left the room and could hear them mumbling, but they had shut the door behind them. Brad came out first. I started by warning him about Jill, making it clear that if she found out, he'd end up in the hospital. He didn't say much, just told me to get out of his house. So I left, and Susan followed me with a questioning look on her face. Susan confessed, admitting that she'd tried to keep her affair with Brad hidden from me, but she knew I'd eventually uncover the truth. I decided it was time for a divorce and told her I'd start the paperwork the next day. I urged her to leave. She chuckled, saying I couldn't afford it and that I'd miss our daughter. She even taunted me, asking what I'd tell her. I shot back, saying I'd tell our daughter the truth, that her mom had been unfaithful and we were getting a divorce. I believed she was a smart girl and could handle it since Susan was hardly around half the time anyway. Susan defied me, insisting she wouldn't go anywhere and that I wasn't man enough to force her out. She suggested I move into the guest room if I didn't want to be with her. I left the house and went to pick up Trina. I had to talk to her and tell her the truth. I wished I could spare her from it, but there was no way I could stay with her mother. After picking her up from school, I took her out for pizza and started the conversation. I had a difficult conversation with my daughter Trina, where I told her that her mother and I were getting a divorce. Trina already suspected it, and even asked me directly if we were getting a divorce. I confirmed it, explaining that her mother and I couldn't stay together any longer. To my surprise, Trina revealed that she already knew her mother was cheating on me. She had been aware of it for some time but didn't tell me because she loved me and didn't want to see me get hurt. She believed that if I didn't find out, it wouldn't affect me. Despite being only 7 years old, she was quite perceptive. Trina then disclosed how she had discovered her mother's infidelity. She first saw her mother with Uncle Joe a few months ago, and later with Warren, a man from the grocery store. Trina also noticed her mother acting inappropriately close to her friends at parties. She expressed her sorrow, knowing I would eventually find out about these affairs. I really wish this whole situation had unfolded later rather than sooner. It's unbelievable that my adorable daughter knew her mom was involved in affairs, but kept it from me because she didn't want to hurt me. I was hesitant to probe her, but I needed to understand how she stumbled upon her mother's actions. Uncle Joe wasn't actually an uncle. Trina simply used that term because her mom told her to out of respect. I asked, "Sweetheart, are you certain your mother never did anything in your presence?" Trina responded, "No, Daddy, you were away on a trip, and I was staying at my friend's place down the street." I came home to get my bike, and when I went in the garage, I heard strange sounds in the house. I looked in and saw Uncle Joe on top of Mommy. I knew what they were doing, so I left quietly. "Do you swear, Trina?" "Yeah, Daddy. I've heard those same sounds when you and Mom were together, but you always kept the door closed. Mom never knew I was there, and I was scared to tell you. I knew it would hurt you. What about Warren? What did you see?" I overheard Mom talking to him on the phone. She mentioned his name and told him I'd be going to Grandma's later. While I was preparing my overnight bag just before we left, he walked in. He kissed Mom, and she didn't realize I saw them. She told him to wait until later after I left. When I came out of the bedroom, he just smiled at me, thanked Mom, and left. The next morning, when Grandma dropped me off, he was still there, acting like he'd forgotten something. "Dad, even though I'm young, I'm not naive. I wasn't sure whether to get angry or just smile after she made her statement. I simply realized that it was over between Susan and me, and I didn't care about the consequences." When we returned home, Trina barely spoke to her mom. She answered questions when asked, but otherwise remained silent. The next morning, I dropped Trina off at school and then went to see John, my lawyer. He explained that Susan was correct. Our assets would be divided equally. However, he had a couple of surprises that Susan wasn't aware of. I asked John to expedite the hearing so I could get Susan out of the house. I had no desire to share the same living space with her. On my way home, I stopped by my mom's and requested if Trina could stay with her for a few days. I informed her that Susan and I were getting a divorce, and I wanted to shield Trina from the ordeal. Mom assured me she could stay as long as necessary, and I promised to visit Trina every evening. In addition, when I returned home, Susan approached me with her demands. She wanted to claim everything possible, along with substantial child support payments. She even brought up the topic of alimony. It seemed incredibly foolish to me. I assumed she hadn't disclosed all the facts to her attorney. I didn't respond to her. I simply went to bed. The following day, my lawyer John informed me that he had arranged a hearing for custody and living arrangements scheduled for Monday. When I returned home that evening, Susan confronted me and said, "How foolish can you be? You're alleging that I cheated on you. Yes, I received the legal documents at my workplace, but you have no concrete evidence." Once again, I refrained from arguing with her, although I really wanted to knock some sense into her. My primary focus was gaining custody of Trina, and I knew that being abusive to Susan wouldn't help my case. On Monday, we headed to the judge's chamber. I had picked up Trina from school and brought her along with me, as Susan had her attorney in tow. John, my lawyer, met us there as well. Susan questioned, "What's Trina doing here?" I replied, "She's a part of this divorce. She should have a say in where she lives." "Kids should be with their mother," Susan argued. "Well, I guess we'll let the judge decide," was my retort. We all entered the judge's chambers, where he clarified, "This isn't a divorce decree, it's a hearing. We're here to determine who gets what and where you'll live. If everyone can agree, these decisions can be included in your divorce documents. If not, I will make interim rulings until a trial takes place, during which all evidence will be presented." The judge requested that Trina wait in the lobby for a few minutes as he wanted to speak with her. She quietly left the chamber. The judge remarked, "She seems like a very well-behaved young girl. It's a shame you couldn't work things out." Susan nearly smirked, saying, "Thank you, Judge. I've tried my best." I couldn't help but think she could have been an actress. I remained silent, choosing not to argue. Susan's attorney handed the judge her papers, requesting custody of Trina, $150 a week in child support for Trina, and an additional $100 a week in alimony. She also asked for the house and its contents, knowing she could only receive half the house's value. The judge reviewed her documents and pointed out that this was a no-fault divorce state, where everything was typically divided evenly. Susan gave me another one of her smirks, thinking she'd get what she wanted. During the divorce hearing, the judge asked me the reason for requesting an early hearing. I stated that my grounds for divorce were due to my wife Susan's adultery. I expressed my concern about not wanting our daughter, Trina, to be exposed to her infidelity. Susan, in response, loudly claimed I had no proof, challenging me to present any photos, phone conversations, or videos as evidence. The judge had to instruct Susan to calm down and then asked me if I had any evidence to support my claims. I mentioned that my daughter, Trina, was an eyewitness to 2 instances of Susan's infidelity. Susan immediately denied it, accusing me of lying and wrongly using our daughter in the situation. Her reaction and a slip of the tongue did not go unnoticed, but her attorney advised her to remain calm. The judge then took a moment to speak privately with Trina in the hallway. After about 10 minutes, he returned, expressing his belief in Trina's account and preparing to question Susan further. Susan interrupted, insisting that I had coached Trina on what to say and denying any wrongdoing. The judge then questioned Susan about her relationship with a family friend named Uncle Joe, specifically asking if she could explain how Trina knew about a unique tattoo on Joe's body. Susan was shocked and denied Trina's presence or knowledge of such a detail. She insisted that Trina would have told her if she had seen anything. I intervened, stating that Trina had indeed seen Susan with Joe when she returned home once to fetch her bike. I also mentioned Trina's encounter with Warren, another man Susan was involved with, highlighting Susan's frequent absence and questioning how she expected Trina to react to these situations. The judge made his decision. He granted me custody of our daughter, while my wife would have liberal visitation rights. The judge ordered that our house and its contents be valued and divided equally. My lawyer John presented the valuation details. The house was worth $120,000 with a remaining mortgage of $70,000, leaving a net value of $50,000. The contents were valued at $30,000, bringing the total net worth to $80,000, including our 2 vehicles. Susan objected, claiming that the furniture and car, which she purchased herself, were undervalued. The judge, however, explained that divorce doesn't benefit anyone financially. He decreed that I would receive the house and its contents, but would need to pay Susan $30,000. We would each keep our respective vehicles. If we couldn't agree, everything would be auctioned, and the proceeds divided after debts were settled. The judge noted the lack of savings in our finances. Susan protested again about the fairness of the decision, especially regarding the furniture she bought. The judge clarified that in the absence of a prenuptial agreement, assets are split evenly, and I was offered the house because I had custody of Trina, emphasizing the importance of her stability and environment. The judge then asked if I could arrange the $30,000 to pay Susan. I confirmed that I could borrow the amount from my parents, as banks were unlikely to lend us money during the divorce process. In a final ruling, the judge noted our similar incomes and decided that Susan would pay me $150 a week in child support, the amount she had deemed fair. Neither of us would receive alimony. We were both given 3 days to vacate the house, taking only our personal belongings. "It's not fair. Why should I have to pay him?" Susan protested. The judge added one last remark. "If either of you want to contest this divorce and the settlement I've outlined, you're welcome to do so. Mr. Royer's evidence is strong enough to secure custody, and the division of assets is likely to stand." I walked out into the lobby, where I hugged Trina. I knew she loved her mother, and this would be tough on her, but we'd get through it together. Update. Susan was pretty upset about the judge's decision. She considered fighting it, but her lawyer advised against it, saying her chances of winning were slim. My dad did lend me the money to pay Susan off. Each week when the court sent me the money from Susan, I handed it over to my dad. I was making enough to support myself, and with Susan out of the picture, I even had some savings. Life was looking up, except for Susan's constant pestering. Trina told me that during the weekends she spent with her mother, she was questioned about me all the time. Trina mentioned that her mom had apologized for what she had witnessed. Maybe Susan did have some respect for Trina, or she was just playing the part of a good mother. After a couple of months, Susan began making excuses for why she couldn't take Trina. It was always either working late or going on business trips. Supposedly, she had become a secretary for a couple of lawyers, though she never shared more details with me. I suspected she might be doing more than secretarial work, but as long as she kept it away from Trina, I didn't care. One day, my dad called me into his office and had a surprise waiting for me. When I walked in, I saw an old friend, Samantha, whom we always called Sam. Sam came to live with us as a foster child when I was around 12 and she was 14. Her parents had been caught dealing pills and were sent to prison. My parents were asked to auction off their house and belongings, and that's when they met Sam. She was supposed to go to a child care facility, but my mom insisted on becoming her foster parent. Most people foster younger kids, but my parents saw something special in Sam. She stayed with us until she graduated and enlisted in the service. I really liked her and missed her when she left for the service. Although I never told her, in a way, I loved her like an older sister. I was pretty smart and I helped Sam with her homework. To me, she was like family. She did return home on leave, but I was away at college at the time. This was the first time I'd seen her in a decade, and she looked great. She gave me a big hug, and my dad told me he had hired her as our new receptionist. She mentioned that she had spent her early years in combat, but for the past few years, she had been mostly overseas doing computer and electronics work. During our divorce, having Sam's smiling face around every morning was a welcome sight. It's worth noting that Susan and Sam never liked each other from the moment they met. Sam told me she enjoyed studying people and she didn't think Susan was trustworthy. "Mark, I care about you. I don't want to dictate your life, but I wouldn't trust her," Sam cautioned. I had my doubts about Susan, too. I heard rumors that she was still seeing other people even during our separation. It didn't do my reputation any favors, but I had to keep my composure to ensure I didn't lose custody of Trina. Dad invited Trina and me over for a cookout to welcome Sam back home. When we arrived, I introduced Trina to Sam, and they hit it off. It seemed like they had both found a new friend. Susan would often drop by the house claiming she forgot something. I suspected she was checking up on me. I couldn't wait for the divorce to be finalized, so I'd have no reason to let Susan into the house. For now, I was just biding my time. When Trina wasn't around, Susan would taunt me about her lovers. She just couldn't let it go. I knew I shouldn't let it get to me, but it did. Finally, the day of our divorce arrived and life moved on. Spending time with Trina became my greatest joy, and she was my whole world. I should mention that right after Trina was born, I secretly had a DNA test done, which confirmed she was indeed my daughter. I never told Susan about it. However, there was a darker side to my life. I knew about Joe, Warren, and Brad, but I suspected there were many more I didn't know about. Deep down, I wanted revenge, but I had no idea how to go about it. Every time I saw one of those guys, they would mock me. I knew it must have been embarrassing for Trina, but she never said anything. I knew I had to find a way to get back at them, but I wasn't sure how. I saw Sam every day at work, and she had become one of the bright spots in my life. Our friendship had grown stronger since the divorce was finalized. One day, I took my daughter Trina to the office where we met Sam. After their conversation, Trina suggested that Sam join us for a movie outing. I jokingly said that Sam might already have plans, but Sam, smiling, said she was free and actually liked pizza and animated films. It looked like Trina and Sam had already decided, so I arranged for us to pick up Sam later. We had a great time at the movies. On the way back, I suggested we should hang out like this again. Trina, enthusiastic, invited Sam over the next night to watch superhero movies and make popcorn. I was about to excuse us from the commitment, but Sam eagerly accepted the invitation. I was happy about how things were going, but I was cautious about my feelings. Sam and I were just friends, and I didn't want to jeopardize our friendship. During the movie night at my place, Trina eventually fell asleep. Sam then asked me what was on my mind. I shared with Sam my wish for a superpower to deal with the people who ruined my marriage. Sam reminded me to let go of the past and focus on the positives in my life, like my daughter, job, and home. But I couldn't shake off the resentment towards those who had hurt me and fantasized about having a superpower for revenge. Sam indulged in this train of thought, asking me what kind of superpower I would want. I don't know. Maybe the power to make things happen to them? You know, like... You're dwelling on the negative, Mark. How about some positive thoughts? I do have positive ones too, like wanting to kiss and be with you, I confessed, though I knew it was impossible. Some thoughts I had to keep to myself. Later, as Sam was leaving, she thanked me for inviting her over and said she had a wonderful time. She asked me to give Trina a kiss for her. I hugged her and walked her to the door. The next morning, after getting Trina ready for school, I dropped her off and headed to my office. As I stepped out of my car, lightning struck nearby. I don't think it hit me, but it knocked me over, and I banged my head on the car. The next thing I knew, I woke up in a hospital bed with Sam standing by my side. I asked Sam what had happened, as I only remembered seeing lightning before falling. Sam informed me that I had fallen and hit my head on the car, resulting in a concussion. The doctors had performed an MRI, and while I was going to be all right, I needed to spend the night in the hospital for observation. Concerned about my daughter Trina, I asked about her whereabouts. Sam reassured me that she would pick Trina up from school and bring her to visit me. She also offered to have Trina spend the night with her if I was comfortable with that arrangement. I expressed my complete trust in Sam, mentioning that my head felt strange from the concussion. Of course it does. You just banged your head and have a concussion. Don't worry. The doctor said you'll be good as new in a couple of days. Well, I better get back to the office. You take care of yourself and listen to the doctors, Sam said, leaning over and giving me a kiss on the lips. It was more than just a peck, and it felt so comforting. Oh, I forgot to mention, an old college friend of yours stopped by the office this morning. He said he'd visit you here. She gave me another quick kiss and left. I couldn't help but wonder if I did have some kind of superpower, considering she kissed me after I thought about it. I also wondered who this college friend might be. I eventually drifted off to sleep and was awakened by none other than my old college buddy, Tony DeMarco. He mentioned he had some business in Ohio and figured he'd swing by to see me. We reminisced about the good old days, and I expressed my gratitude for helping me get lucky. We had a good laugh, and he asked about Susan. I spilled the beans about her cheating and our divorce. I made sure to mention that I did get a beautiful daughter out of it. He mentioned he had 3 kids and was happily married. Before he left, he reminded me that if I ever needed anything, I should give him a shout. But then, I started thinking about Warren and how he'd mocked me. Just 2 days ago, he stood right in front of me boasting to his buddies about scoring with my ex. It really ticked me off. Revenge was on my mind. As Sam approached, I couldn't help but will another kiss from her, and I got it. But then she looked into my eyes and said, "Mark, there's something I need to tell you. It's very personal, but I feel you need to know." She asked Trina to wait in the hallway for a moment. "I haven't been entirely truthful with you, and I think it's time I come clean." "You don't have to tell me this, Sam," I said, concerned. "Yes, I do. Please let me finish." She seemed determined. "Before being released from the service, I spent 2 months in a psych ward. I wasn't crazy, but I did something, and it's been weighing on me." I didn't want her to continue, but she insisted. "There was a group of us at a bar, and the guys were getting too drunk. They started grabbing at me, and despite my warnings, they wouldn't stop. I managed to grab a beer bottle, and the next thing I knew, MPs were arresting me and taking me to the psych ward where I spent those 2 months. The other soldiers covered for me, saying it was all in good fun, like some sort of syndrome. I just wanted you to know the truth about my past, Mark. I'm so sorry for keeping it from you. You deserve better." I thanked her for confiding in me, though I couldn't help but wonder if somehow I had willed her to be honest with me. This power was intriguing, but I knew I had to be cautious with it. After Sam left, I reflected on her, Tony, and Warren as I drifted off to sleep. The next morning, I was roused from my slumber by Trina and Sam. "Daddy, you get to come home today," Trina exclaimed. "Sam and I are taking you out for breakfast. We're going to McDonald's." It wasn't my favorite place to eat, but the company was more than welcome. Update. After returning home, I started reading the newspaper. An article caught my eye. It said Warren, the guy from the grocery store, had been found frozen in his walk-in freezer. Apparently, the inside opening mechanism malfunctioned, and he froze to death. They didn't suspect foul play. It was just a bizarre accident. My dad gave me a call to check if I was doing okay. He had been out of town and couldn't make it to the hospital while I was there. After assuring him that everything was fine, he asked me to swing by the grocery store where Warren, the guy who passed away, worked and fill out an insurance claim. It turns out Warren had insurance with our company. As I filled out the paperwork, some folks gave me odd looks, probably because they knew about Warren bragging about his involvement with my ex. They might have wondered if I had something to do with his accident. Over the next week, I successfully closed all my appointments, thanks to Sam's help. Before entering each house, I wished that they'd choose our insurance. I even managed to sell 2 houses during that time. It was a great week for me, my dad, and Sam. Life was going smoothly until I crossed paths with Brad. I had a real estate appointment to list a house, and when I got there, no one answered the door for a few minutes. After another ring of the doorbell, a well-dressed lady finally appeared. "I'm Mark Royer. We had an appointment to sign your real estate papers. I also brought the sign to put in your yard." She apologized, saying, "I lost track of time. Can I sign the papers now, and you can put the sign in the yard? You can take the outside picture. But if you can return another time for interior shots, I'd like to tidy up a bit." I agreed. "No problem. I'll send someone by tomorrow to take the rest of the pictures." As I started taking some exterior photos, I couldn't help but notice a car parked across the street, which I recognized as Brad's from his previous visits to my driveway. It seemed he was inside, possibly romancing Mrs. Diaz, whom Sam had mentioned was going through a divorce and wanted to sell her house. I couldn't help but wonder if Brad played a part in her divorce as well, alongside his involvement with Jill and Susan. My curiosity got the best of me, so I decided to call Susan. It was partly to ensure she'd take Trina for the weekend, but mostly to share the news that I had seen Brad. I knew it was merely his car I'd seen, but it was enough for me. 2 days later, they found Brad dead, apparently due to a mishap while exercising. The weights were too heavy and the bar slipped. The police were investigating, and although they had dropped by to question me, I had a solid alibi. I was with Trina at her school. She was in a play, and sadly her mom couldn't make it. I couldn't help but wonder if my thoughts somehow influenced these events. I hoped Jill wasn't involved. She deserved better than what she got. The police left the case open, and they hadn't ruled out homicide, even though it might have been an accident. My sales were thriving, and life with Trina couldn't have been better. Sam was becoming a more integral part of our lives. Trina always wanted Sam to join us when we went out, and I found myself grappling with complex emotions and thoughts. Was I unconsciously causing these feelings for Trina to develop towards Sam? Was Sam wanting to join us because my thoughts were making it happen? Honestly, I didn't like this aspect of it. I wanted the three of us to be together because we genuinely wanted to, not because of some unexplained influence. I had to make a visit to a new housing development. Several construction companies were operating there, and I needed to arrange liability insurance for the developers. I had to check with each construction firm and make sure all the necessary insurance forms were filled out. Of course, it had to happen. I stumbled upon the company Joe Akers worked for, the infamous Uncle Joe Trina had seen with my ex. He laughed at me as I walked past, not knowing how much that stung. I decided to approach him when he was alone, and the look on his face when I walked away was priceless. He probably read about the deaths in the paper and knew about my divorce. One day, my friend Tony called, saying he'd be passing through town and suggested we grab lunch. We met up and reminisced about the old days. Tony invited me to New York for a vacation and asked if I was seeing anyone. I mentioned the woman I cared for, but emphasized that it wasn't too serious. I told him about Sam, and he seemed to think it sounded quite serious. He then suggested I ask Sam if she'd like to join us for a trip to New York, along with my daughter. That night I called Sam and invited her to join us on a vacation to New York. Tony had extended the invitation, and he would show us around the city. She immediately agreed, but in the back of my mind I couldn't help but wonder if it was my unconscious influence or her genuine choice. On an evening when I had an appointment, I dropped Trina off at my parents' place. After getting the necessary papers signed, I was on my way back to town when I was involved in a car accident. The next thing I knew, I was back in the hospital with Sam sitting there next to my dad. In a state of confusion, I asked what had happened, recalling a car accident and wondering about the duration of my unconsciousness. My dad informed me that I had been in a coma for 3 days, during which he, Sam, and my mom had taken turns staying by my side. Concerned about my daughter Trina, I inquired about her well-being. Sam assured me that Trina was fine but worried about me. She had been staying with my mom, and they had decided not to bring her to the hospital to see me in an unconscious state. They planned to bring her to visit me that afternoon. Feeling that something was being withheld, I expressed my suspicion that they were keeping something from me. My dad then revealed that Joe Akers, a man known to us, had been found dead on the same night as my car accident. Initially, the police considered me a person of interest, but they quickly ruled me out as I was in a coma. I was curious about the details, so my dad explained that he had seen Joe a few days earlier at a construction site, which was why the police initially suspected me. Sam continued the story, disclosing that Joe's truck had caught fire right outside Susan's apartment. The report suggested that Joe had been visiting Susan, and the incident occurred when he left her place in his truck. He had a few drinks, and he didn't have a chance. I glanced at Sam, and she understood my thoughts. All I could picture was getting hit by another car. Sam and Dad left but promised to return later with Trina. Mom brought Trina to visit me, and seeing both of them made me so happy. I inquired about Sam, and Mom mentioned she was busy catching up on my work. She could handle everything except signing legal documents. My mom observed that I seemed to have strong feelings for Sam, mentioning how it was evident every time Sam was around. I apologized to her, feeling a bit uncomfortable about the topic. She recognized Sam as a wonderful person and reminded me that Sam was a foster child in our family, not my sister, implying that it was okay for me to have romantic feelings for her. Trina then joined the conversation, sharing her affection for Sam. She commented on Sam's kindness and how well she treated her, even better than her own mother. Trina believed that Sam also had feelings for me. Curious about Trina's perspective, I asked her why she thought that. Trina explained that it was just the way Sam acted around me and the fact that she always joined us whenever I invited her. The doctor mentioned I could go home after lunch. Mom called the office and informed Dad that she and Trina would stay with me and drive me home. Update. Sam came over to watch a movie with Trina and me. She prepared popcorn for us and we settled on the couch. As usual, Trina fell asleep, and Sam took her to her room and tucked her in. When she returned to the room, I found myself blinking my eyes repeatedly. Sam asked me if my eyes were okay and if I needed a doctor, mentioning my recent concussion. I told her that I thought I had lost my powers after trying to use them in the hospital. When she asked what I tried to do, I explained that I attempted to make the hospital staff bring me a stick. Then Sam asked what I was doing when she entered the room. I felt embarrassed but admitted that I was trying to see if I could make her kiss me. We locked eyes, and I was unsure about her thoughts. Sam then told me that if I wanted a kiss, I should have just asked. She explained that she had been waiting for me and cared for me ever since she returned to town. She shared her past with me and even kissed me in the hospital, but I never reciprocated. I told her that I thought she kissed me because I willed it and that I wanted her to want me for who I am, not because of my powers. Sam then asked if I really had no power now. Ask Sam. That's right. To clarify, my powers are completely gone. Then bring me to your bedroom and make love to me. I'm more than willing. I woke up in the morning and took a shower right away. Sam smiled at me as she got into the shower herself. Afterward, we both sat at the table, sipping on our coffee, when Trina walked into the kitchen. "Morning, Daddy. Morning, Sam. Did you spend the night here?" she asked. I sensed it was a bit awkward, but Sam simply told her, "Yes, I did. I was too tired to go home." It was amusing, but Trina didn't ask any more questions. She just grabbed a bowl, poured her cereal, and started eating breakfast. During our commute to work, I opened up to Sam about my feelings. I told her that I loved her and that I was actually relieved to have lost whatever power I had. I just didn't know how to control it. Most importantly, I wanted to be sure that when she said she loved me, it came from her heart and not because of any power. Before getting out of the car, Sam leaned over, kissed me, and said, "Mark, I truly love you, and I'll do whatever it takes to make you happy and keep us together." The day was going well until I heard Susan, my wife, demanding to see me in the reception area. She walked past Sam and entered my office, closing the door behind her. Susan accused me of being behind the deaths of her past lovers and threatened to have me arrested. I denied any involvement, pointing out my cooperation with the police and my hospitalizations during 2 of the deaths, including a coma during 1. I told her it would be difficult to blame me. Despite her persistence in accusing me, I asked her to leave my office and threatened to call security. I expressed regret over our marriage, acknowledging only our daughter Trina as the good outcome. I hinted that if I had wanted anyone dead, it would have been Susan herself. After she stormed out of my office, I heard her arguing with Sam in the lobby. Surprisingly, Sam seemed to be handling the situation well. Sam warned Susan to stay away from me, mentioning she had something to show her. She handed Susan a manila envelope containing pictures of Susan with various men. When Susan asked where these came from, Sam revealed they were dropped at her desk, highlighting that they showed Susan with her lovers shortly before their deaths. Susan, now frightened, questioned who took the photos and whether Sam knew who destroyed her boyfriends. She threatened to take the photos to the police. However, Sam suggested she reconsider, comparing her to a Black Widow spider, insinuating that Susan might have been involved in her lovers' deaths. "You were the last person to see them alive. I'll tell the police you gave me these pictures," Susan retorted. Susan added that she was wearing gloves and would deny seeing the photos. I explained to Susan that the pictures had been left on my desk one morning and that I had never met any of the men in them. Sam then advised Susan to stay away from me and stop making accusations. She pointed out that I was unaware of Susan's other affairs, including her latest lover, Larry. When Susan asked how Sam knew about Larry and the others, Sam didn't reveal how but emphasized the importance of her knowledge. She suggested that Susan and Larry should move out of town, possibly transferring to another branch of her law firm for their own good. Concerned about her daughter, Trina, Susan inquired about her. Sam assured her that she could see Trina whenever she wanted, highlighting my good nature and suggesting arrangements for visits during holidays. Susan then speculated that Sam was in love with me and wanted her out of the picture. Sam affirmed her love for both me and Susan, advising Susan to move on and enjoy her life without problems. After Susan left, I walked into the lobby and asked Sam about their argument. Sam downplayed it as just girl talk, mentioning that she told Susan to leave me alone and even suggested she move to a nearby city. I didn't probe further, thinking that if things worked out as Sam suggested, I would be happy with that outcome. I got a call from Susan the following week. She told me she had a chance for another promotion but would have to leave next week. It would be clear on the other side of the state. She asked about seeing Trina, and I arranged for her to see her before she left. Sam and I got married a month later. Trina was almost as happy as I was. Mom and Dad said they couldn't be happier and were glad we found each other. We spent our honeymoon visiting New York. Tony and his wife let us stay at their mansion and showed us the town. Trina went with us while we toured New York and stayed with Tony's kids at night while we enjoyed the nightlife. The last thing Tony said to me before we went home was, "Don't forget, if you ever need me, I'm just a phone call away." Trina does go visit her mother a couple of times a year. We have never had another problem with Susan, and we still receive her check every month. As far as the deaths of Susan's lovers go, they are still unsolved.